Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2024. This is a rambunctious summer-long BookTube event created by Vin at Revenant Reads, where we read Star Trek stuff all summer long. It's just wonderful. I always enjoy Book Trek. I have the same worry every year. I've been co-hosting this for years. I always have the same worry about flooding the airwaves with Star Trek videos when my co-hosts have all sorts of real-world responsibilities, so they can't do the same thing. I always worry that in Book Trek, in the course of a summer, I will make 100 videos and they'll each make 2. I don't want that to happen, and yet I do want that to happen because there's so much to talk about with Star Trek. I always want to make a video. You don't have to read. If you read a single Star Trek book this summer, then you've participated in Book Trek. But it doesn't even have to be Star Trek. Because one of our away missions, we have 2 away missions. One is to read one of the unreadable Star Trek adjacent nonfiction works, unreadable memoirs by the actors or the showrunners or whatever. But the other is to read a work of popular science, which I do all the time. And maybe you do all the time. Maybe you have an interest in that. So that would also count as Book Trek. I will spend most of my time reading Star Trek, and last night, I reread something that I've read a million times. I'm sure I've talked about it a million times on Book Trek. But I felt like going back to basics. When you talk about Star Trek fiction, it doesn't get any more basic than this. This is Star Trek by James Blish. 1967. This isn't even Star Trek 1. This had no knowledge of the series of very popular adaptations of scripts that it would become. This is just the very first attempt at that. By the UK science fiction writer James Blish, who really is given an impossible task in this book or in any of the subsequent Star Trek books. He's given an impossible task, especially in this first one, which is to fill out the shooting scripts for a handful of episodes into prose. When that's it, without anything else. There was no show Bible at this time. There was no 10, 15, 30 pages of explanation about each character that you could send also via interstellar mail to James Blish over in England. It wasn't anything like that. There wasn't even, in most cases, the shows themselves for Blish to watch. Instead, it was just the scripts. He was getting these things and saying, turn these into short stories. Adapt these into prose. Which, in order to understand what a task that is, think back to when Star Trek Strange New Worlds, for instance, the current ongoing classic Trek show. Think back to when it had not yet aired, there were no internet rumors at all, but there was a trailer, a teaser trailer, that showed a few members of the crew, and that's it. Show yourself that trailer. I'm sure that trailer is available on YouTube, and then imagine writing a novel about set in that world. Maybe that's not even a good example because all of that world premiered on Star Trek STD. So you would have had advance warning. Picture instead, maybe I guess the better example would be not Star Trek. Watch a trailer for an upcoming movie. A movie that doesn't come out until the autumn. Watch a trailer for that movie. Just the trailer, nothing else. And try to write the movie. Try to write the story of that trailer. The chances of you being accurate are 1,000,000 to 1. And that's what James Blish was up against here. So he couldn't take a whole lot of chances. Obviously couldn't change anything from the script that he was given. But he didn't know who these people were. And neither did the makers of this book. No one knew who these people were. The show was brand new. It was not anything that was part of culture anymore. You can learn this by reading the very back of this paperback. You can learn it from the front cover, too. I mean, that's pretty good studio artwork there, but look at this. You have the shuttle bays blasting out rocket fuel, and so are the warp nacelles. That is just, I mean, this is an adaptation of one of the great matte paintings from the original show. But this is just a standard science fiction cover. It isn't Star Trek. It's anti-Star Trek in a lot of ways. But the back cover is just as bad. We're introduced to 3 characters here. Captain James Kirk, assigned to the top position in the Space Service, Starship Command. Kirk alone must make decisions in his contact with other worlds that can affect the future course of civilization throughout the universe. Literally all of that is wrong. It's not the highest position in the space service. It's not the space service. He's not making the decisions alone, and no decision that he makes affects the whole universe. Then we have Science Officer Spock, inheriting a precise logical thinking pattern from his father, a native of the planet Vulcanus. Mr. Spock maintains a dangerous Earth trait, an intense curiosity about things of alien origin. And then the third person mentioned here, you assume it's going to be Dr. McCoy. No, it's Yeoman Rand. Earth, easily the most popular member of the crew, the truly out-of-this-world blonde, has drawn the important assignment of secretary to captain on her first mission in deep space. Which we don't see, and there's no hint of that here. And what this is James Blish writing down, making prose out of the shooting scripts of a handful of episodes. And I will tell you what the episodes are, but a couple of them you're not going to immediately recognize if you don't know this book. The first one is called Charlie's Law. What on earth is that? The second one is called Dagger of the Mind. The third one is called The Unreal McCoy. Do you know of a Star Trek episode called The Unreal McCoy? Then Balance of Terror, then The Naked Time, then Miri, finishing up with The Conscience of the King. Each one gets 10 pages, fewer, something like that. And the shooting script is not the final script, right? You're tinkering with it until the very end. And in the case of Star Trek, in a couple of noted instances, it's not just the on-set writers who are tinkering with things, it's the actors who are just walking across the styrofoam set to the writer who's, in a corner of the set and saying, I think we could do more with this. This moment, I think we could do more with this. Or how about this? Or wouldn't this be funny? Shatner was hilarious on set of Star Trek. And a lot of that humor percolated through. What about the comic timing, even of dramatic moments? Couldn't we improve the timing of this just a bit? Keep in mind, the core cast of Star Trek were absolute veterans when it came to styrofoam set, TV-type productions. Absolute veterans. DeForest Kelley had been in a million shows on TV, knew his way around a script, knew how to maybe fix it just a little. They had no pretensions to be a writer, but maybe fix it just a little. And Leonard Nimoy did have talent as a writer, so what you're getting here is just what was handed to the actors when they got on set that day. It wasn't the finished product at all. And that applied, obviously, to the titles, right? We don't have an episode called The Unreal McCoy. We have an episode called The Man Trap. We don't have Charlie's Law. We have Charlie X. But it also applies to the episodes themselves. Charlie's Law, for instance, has a far less poignant ending than Charlie X does. It was given a better ending when it was shot. Same thing with Miri. There's an element that runs throughout the episode of Miri that is far better handled on screen than it is in the script that James Blish was handed and told not to change. He was told you can elaborate on it a little. You want to describe somebody or give them a character trait of some kind or other, go right ahead. But you can't change anything. If you're a science fiction writer, Blish was an experienced science fiction writer. But he was told, no, you're adapting this script. Don't change anything. He must have come across a million items in here that he wanted to change. Any science fiction writer would do that. That's why a lot of them were drawn to this show. Because they were looking at episodes and saying, no, you want to do it better than this. Probably the worst example here, and I don't mean worst completely pejoratively, because Blish is, I think, doing what he can here. The biggest example of a change is The Naked Time, which is a famous Star Trek episode. It's a great Star Trek episode where the ship is infested with an inhibition-lowering infection that causes the crew. It doesn't exactly cause them to get drunk. It instead brings their worries and inhibitions forward, and sometimes their dreams of glory forward as well. And it's easy to transmit, so everybody gets it. Eventually, everybody gets it on board the ship. Almost everybody gets it. Scotty doesn't get it, but somebody needs to pull their fat out of the fire. And in the original shooting script, it's largely played for comedy. And that was changed drastically for the finished product, for the episode that you watch. And then, if you're me, rewatch and rewatch and rewatch. And the most signature part, the change that is the biggest, is Mr. Spock. And the greatest scene in that episode, and one of the greatest scenes in the original Star Trek, was entirely added after the shooting script. Kirk is looking for Spock. The ship is in deadly peril. They need to break the laws of physics or they're all going to die. He needs Spock's scientific expertise and no one can find him. He finds Spock alone in a briefing room, almost crying. He has caught the virus, and it is bringing forth all of his suppressed emotions about growing up on a world in a society where love, where emotions are bad taste. Reflects on his mother. That was as much Leonard Nimoy as it was anybody else. The scene is amazingly good. It's amazingly good. Kirk eventually has to belt him across the face to get him to focus on himself, unaware at the moment that physical contact will affect Kirk. He has to belt Spock across the face a couple of times. And Leonard Nimoy, I should say, has the great line, "Jim, when I feel friendship for you, I'm ashamed." And the scene is also famous because a certain writer on the set stepped forward and said, well, if Kirk is belting Spock over and over again to get him to focus on the problem at hand, but if Spock were to belt Kirk, it would be different. Vulcans are much stronger than humans. If he belts Kirk, he's going to send him across the room. And that met with a momentary objection from Shatner, who didn't like to lose on-screen fights. But he saw the sense of it, and that is exactly what happens. Eventually, Spock is angered to the point where he backhands Kirk and sends him flying across the room. And then Kirk is infected. Not only with the virus, but also with bad acting. But the bad acting also has some wonderfully poignant moments in it. It is classic Jim Kirk. Once he realizes he's been infected, and once Spock and Scotty realize he's infected, it is classic Jim Kirk that in addition to all the instructions that he needs to save the ship, he also tells them to clear the corridors. He doesn't want the crew to see him like this. That is wonderful. That is the young Tyro Kirk. And you don't get any of that in this book. You don't get the most powerful emotional moment in Miri is not in here. The most powerful emotional moment in Charlie X is not in here. The best moment, the single best moment, there aren't many best moments in The Unreal McCoy or The Man Trap, but there is a really good moment in that scene. It's not in this. It's not that Blish doesn't do it well, it's that it's not in the script he was given. So this is frustrating. On the one hand, rereading this volume, this physical volume, rereading it, of course, it lets the floodgates loose of nostalgia. This, once upon a time, I don't know how to tell it to fans who weren't there at the very beginning. I mean, in 20 years after this thing came out, there was a flood of Star Trek everywhere. There were 4 or 5 Star Trek books every month. There were, at one point, almost 4 shows on TV. There were movies. It was a gigantic multi-million-dollar franchise, but not when this came out. We had almost nothing when this thing came out. And I also don't know how to explain it to people who've become Star Trek fans only of New Trek, only in the 21st century. Because the so-called Star Trek that's out now, New Trek, says that you can either be a good person or a bad person. If you're a good person, you'll like New Trek, and if you're a bad person, you won't. And anyone who doesn't like New Trek is a bad person. The old Star Trek franchise never even thought to turn an accusing stare at the fans. It never even thought to do that. So, in either case, Star Trek books now are just a trickle. There are barely any. And there were almost none now. In between then and now, there was a gigantic high point. And a lot of Star Trek fans, including, I think, all of my co-hosts for Book Trek, are part of that upsurge, of that high swing. I am surrounded by next-gen fans. On Book Trek, I am surrounded by next-gen fans who all would know Star Trek in the sunny heyday of its splendor, when it was everywhere and when it was well known. Naturally, when I'm rereading this, some of that nostalgia is going to come forward. I remember exactly what the weather was like when I was eagerly buying and reading this book. But on the other hand, there's a lot of frustration. James Blish is long gone. Most of this cast is long gone. Most of the writers are long gone. And also this continuity is long gone. No one's ever going to revisit this. well, people are going to... The original Star Trek, NCC 1701, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, that is going to be rebooted and utterly desecrated. Just utterly, horrifically desecrated. For Twitter politics, to please 12 psychos on Twitter who aren't even going to watch the show. I'm hoping that that is postponed long enough so that fans of the show, old-time fans of the show, are all dead and don't have to see it. I'm hoping that this is true, but I don't think it is. I don't think that is true. I think that's going to happen either on the small screen or a really good chance the big screen sometime in the late 2020s. But for now, no one is revisiting this continuity. And even so, they would do it in book form, which nobody cares about. So once again, my call here is to do this over again. No offense to James Blish. No offense to the fans who eagerly bought this book and read it. I was one of those fans. No offense to any of those people, but let's do this all over again. Let's do this all over again, especially since the end results will be different. Why don't we get the finished shooting script for each of these episodes, plus the Blu-ray DVD editions of the episodes themselves, and make a novel out of each one of them? And assign those novels to different writers. There are plenty of science fiction writers out there who do it for free. Make a novel of Charlie X. Make a novel of The Naked Time. It's easily possible to do. Or if you don't think that these things can be whole novels, then give us a 500-page book that writes the short stories of each of these episodes. So not this. This is, 130 pages. Give us a 500-page book that gives us each of these episodes in its full glory, with its full complexity, by someone who not only saw the final additions to the script, but saw the episode. That's not a lot to ask. After 50, 60 years, that's not a lot to ask. Why don't we have that? Star Trek, the original voyages. But we don't. We don't for now. Instead, we have just little glimpses, tantalizing glimpses here and there. For instance, the episode Balance of Terror is one of the episodes written up in here. It's a terrific episode where Kirk has a cat and mouse game with a Romulan commander. Routinely listed as one of the greatest Star Trek episodes of the original series. Large chunks of Balance of Terror, were redone by Diane Carey in her Star Trek The Next Generation novel, Ship of the Line. They gave a very good indication of what could be done with a lot of this stuff. I guess you just have to go hunting for little bits and pieces like that all throughout Star Trek until Paramount, until Pocket Books or whoever is in charge of this, takes Steve's suggestion. Announce that you are calling for writers for Star Trek The Original Voyages, Volume 1. Where your task, should you choose to accept it, is to write a 35-page story of Miri. Watch the episode a million times. Read the final shooting script a million times. Think about it in context of the Enterprise's previous episode, their last mission, and what their next mission is, and the past of all the characters. Ponder it for a long time. You're not under any kind of crushing deadline that James Blish was. And then write 35 pages of Miri. Write Miri as a 35-page short story that works, where you introduce the characters, and you introduce the Federation, and you introduce the stakes involved. Blish doesn't do any of that. He doesn't know any of that, so he doesn't give you any kind of broader context here. And no one's in character. No one talks like themselves. He's never heard any of them talk. No one acts like themselves. Who knew what they were like at the time? Now we do. And no one's going to care about this otherwise, but original fans will. So write these. Give us Star Trek The Original Voyages, Volume 1. You can include all these same stories. I would say not. If I had my way, I would say do the stories in chronological order. But it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me either way. I would like to see that. So that was my Book Trek report for today. My captain's log was going back to the basics, going back to Star Trek by James Blish. Not even Star Trek 1, just Star Trek. No idea where I'll go next time, but I will wrap this up for now. We'll find out together next time I make a video. Thank you, BookTube.